Commission reviews, still working on catching up someday, eventually. I've now read volume 2 of The Old Guard, Force Multiplied. So, this is the second volume, exact same creative team as previously. If you want to check out my review of the first volume there, I don't remember if I did an actual review of the movie. I might have. I know I've mentioned that I like it. The Netflix movie starring Charlize Theron is great, and it made me excited to read it. Now, the first volume was very good, but not unexpected, because turns out that Netflix adaptation was an exceptionally faithful adaptation of that first book. So there wasn't a lot that it could offer me other than the specifics of the presentation, the art style, and just sort of seeing how it played out in a different medium from film. And it was still worth reading on that basis, but actual plot, characters, not too much difference. This has this has some new stuff to show you. So this is dealing with the fallout of the events of the first one, which I am going to talk about pretty freely, and I am eventually going to have to talk spoilers in this, which also means I might potentially be spoiling things in the second Old Guard movie if that actually ends up happening. That was supposed to have started production a while back, but obviously everything's been thrown off with COVID, and now Netflix, it's really unclear how much money they actually have to throw behind production. So until it actually starts shooting, I'm going to kind of doubt, but it's possible. So be aware of all that. But I'll give you the heads up before I get into proper spoilers. This is dealing with the fallout of the group having been betrayed by one of their own, that being Booker, and also their point of contact who had kind of sold them out. They are still kind of recovering from that event. They have their new member, Niles, who is still kind of getting her feet under her. She's got the basics down, but obviously there's a lot of difference between her and the others, especially Andy, because of the age difference. Nile is in her 20s. Andy is thousands of years old. There is a gulf of experience that is just not possible to overcome. And it's very understandable that Andy looks at someone like Niall and thinks, yeah, I get you feel that now. Wait around, see if you still think the way you do in however many hundred or thousands of years. There's also a lot of emphasis in this on how alone Andy feels. We get flashbacks to sort of her earliest point, like before she realized she was immortal, i.e. before the first time she died, and sort of glimpses of what she did with her life after realizing that. And she wasn't a great person for a while, and she was very, very alone. And that kind of continued until she met Noriko. Now, Noriko, if you've seen the movie, was teased at the end of that. And yeah, she is, I guess you could call her the villain. She's the antagonist, certainly. This volume actually doesn't have as clear-cut a villain. There are definitely people doing very bad things. But whereas you had the pharmaceutical guy in the previous volume, just prepared to do all sorts of terrible things to get the secrets of immortality, here you just have another immortal with a fundamentally opposing outlook to her existence versus the other immortals that we've met and interacted with up to this point. And that does make her dangerous, and she is definitely involved in a lot of shady stuff, but she doesn't have a grand plan that needs foiling. So it's not that kind of villain as far as the story goes. But her reemergence causes a lot of turmoil within the group, especially for Andy. And it's handled really interestingly. There's a lot of depth to the characters, and it does a very good job of keeping track of the fact that each of these people are going to respond very differently. It never treats this group as a monolith. They are a unit, but they don't all think the same. And there's just interesting points at which that divergence becomes clear. One of those being an instance where Joe and Nikki are they're meeting with someone. They say flat out, if Andy was here, she'd have killed you already. And just sort of, without it being a flat out schism amongst the group, just giving you regular reminders that they don't all think exactly the same. And I really especially like Joe and Nikki. There's this great moment. It's this tiny moment where they're getting into a shootout and Nikki like gets up to this guy who's, he's on the opposite side of this whole confrontation. He places a shotgun barrel to the guy's chest and he goes, "I'm sorry," and pulls the trigger. I'm like, the fact that you are hundreds of years old, but you still kind of feel bad that this is what you do, like that says a lot about him. And actually, it's really interesting, especially when feeding into Andy's loneliness, because she is very quick to point out to Niall, you could find someone to be close to, but it's going to be fleeting. They will die and you will keep living, whether they die now from something violent or later from old age. You are going to end up being alone. And though I don't think she actually says it, but that does point to why Joe and Nikki are so stable, because they get to stay together. They get to stay alive, immortal together. And that is just a really well illustrated difference between their outlook and someone like Noriko or Andy or Booker or even Niall at this early point in her understanding of what she is. And there's some interesting questions being asked. There's a character who sort of points out, like, look, you've been dealing with these other people. This person was obsessed with how. This person, was obsessed with what you should be doing. I kind of want to know why. And somebody trying to sort out meaning behind the purpose of these people. And normally that would be almost kind of a red flag for me. I'd be like, you don't need to explain why. Highlander didn't need to explain why. And when it did, it was real dumb. But the answer that he comes up with is the kind of thing that I think people would gravitate towards if they were aware of the existence of people like this. And the fact that he can point to it and be like, yeah, I think this might be it, but he doesn't know for certain. He's just like, maybe this? It was good. It was well handled. I got to start getting into more specific spoilers. So overall, if you read the first volume, read this. Third volume, frustratingly, is not out yet, with no date announced as it currently stands. I really hope it comes out soon. I'm going to snatch it up as soon as it's available, because definitely the way this ends, there is more to be done here. It's still a good ending point. It's not, I wouldn't consider this ending to be a cliffhanger, but it is there is more story to tell-ish situation. So that's your spoiler warning. Gonna start getting into some specifics here. So circling back on what I said about the character who says, well, why? That's Copley. And I didn't want to give away that he comes back, although that probably wasn't too spoilery. But, he was their contact who kind of betrayed them last time, and he found himself asking, why, and he started hunting down, to the best that he could find, people who were alive because of the actions of these immortals, because of the actions of the old guard. What have these people done since surviving simply because you came in and rescued them, took out somebody who needed to be taken out, whatever? And he kept finding people who went on to do wonderful, extraordinary things. And that was, I think, an answer, again, like I said a bit more vaguely earlier, that feels like the kind of answer that somebody who's looking for one would gravitate towards. And it's nebulous enough that I think it works as a guiding philosophy, even if it's not factual, which that's just, I think, a decent way to introduce the notion of a reason, the notion of a purpose, without being forced to commit to it. And of course, he also flips it on its head, because in Noriko's wake is nothing but destruction and pain. And so we got to talk about a bit about Noriko. This I couldn't get into very much because of spoilers. So I got worried initially, because we've got the whole thing, and this was covered in the movie already, that she drowned. She ended up basically at the bottom of the ocean, and she just kept drowning over and over and over and over and over again. She would drown, she'd come back, and she'd drown again. And I was really worried initially that this was going to be a tale of vengeance, that like she was out to get Andy because, and she does actually say at one point, like, you didn't come for me. But like, as Andy rightfully points out, like, you went overboard on a boat in the middle of the ocean. How was anybody supposed to even try and find you? So, and the thing that makes it okay is that ultimately you realize, no, she's actually not, like, she has some bitterness, but this is not a revenge story. being put through that much pain, that much death for she doesn't even know how long, actually, so far as we can tell, that warped her perception of the world. Her existence truly became pain. And that's the lens that she sees the world through now, through pain, not through making things better, but she sees all the bad, everything wrong, and just that's the filter. That's the filter through which she experiences the world now. And through that filter, making everything worse makes more sense than trying to make it better because you can't make it better. You might as well throw some gas on the fire because you can't put it out. And while I don't think the book ever validates that perspective, it's one that I understood better than I expected to, because it can be a difficult perspective to make understandable if you're going for, something other than like Heath Ledger's Joker, But if you're trying to actually motivate a character and character actions, that's a difficult line to ride, and I think it does it pretty well. But most importantly is what happens with Andy at the end. I mentioned the core of Andy's loneliness, and that really comes back at the end, because she's reached a point where, they get Booker back because Noriko has him, and they're prepared to forgive Booker because he knows he screwed up. And Andy just hits a point where she can't keep doing this. She doesn't have the energy or the drive or the sense of purpose to keep doing what she's been doing and what the rest of this group has been doing. But she also can't stand to be alone. And it becomes a microcosm of something that can trap people in abusive relationships or return them to abusive relationships. Because the mistake Andy made, the fault that she didn't realize she opened herself up to was, yes, she had a support structure, the other members of the group, but it's incredibly small and it's one-tiered. This group of people were her support structure, and that was it. So when she hit a point where she didn't have it in her to keep doing what they're doing, but they're not going to stop. They're not going to fundamentally stop being who they think it is best for them to be in order to try and help her. And they're not going to drag her along with them against their will. They keep moving. They say, we want you to come with us. And she says, I can't. But they need to go. And she says she can't. But she also doesn't want to be alone. So from her perspective, or at least one possible perspective from her, they abandoned her. And Noriko shows up to immediately reinforce that. Noriko, with the most toxic, dangerous outlook on life, shows up in a moment where Andy feels alone and says, see, they left you. All you have is me. And without drawing the parallel directly, it is just such a powerful embodiment of toxicity and what truly dark and damaging people do to keep people within their orbit. Because it can happen that people hit a paralyzing point where it's like, the things that connects you to your support structure isn't working, but you still need them, but you're not connected to them for whatever reason. You move, they move, whatever is the shared interest is something you lose a passion for. You don't have the motivation to get up. Like, there's only so much that they can do, and they still care, but they're not going to drag you along with them when you say you don't want to be there. But it's also not necessarily a reasonable thing to expect people to stop their lives dead in order to ensure that you're not alone. Sometimes you'll find people like that in your life, but you can't expect that. It's part of why it's kind of important to have more than one support system in place. But to see her in that moment of vulnerability, understanding why the rest of them left. They wanted her to come, but she couldn't. I understand why they left. I understand why she didn't. And I understood her pain. But so did her abuser, who walked in and said, "See, I'm right. Now come with me and be your worst self." And that's the ending. That's the ending of this freaking volume. That's why I really, really, really want to get a volume 3, because I want to see what happens if Andy can break out of this, or if this is a spiral that only ends with the worst outcome. I don't know. I don't know what it'll be, but I want to find out. The Old Guard, Force Multiplied. Have you read it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon was how I was commissioned to read this book. And you can not only commission me, you can support me at any tier, and you get some kind of rewards for doing so. So check out those options, but even if you can't, like, share, subscribe help as well. They help combat the algorithm. They've got me up over 10,000 subscribers on this subsidiary channel, which is a nice feeling. But don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. Hey, end credits time, which means I need to shout out some patrons. This time I'm going to be shouting out Robin Moore, Zubin Litfala, Tarak, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Imudelki, Leo the Boy, TT, Fernobulax the Poodle, Zach Paul, Eidolon, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Angry Kasparov, Toku BL Hoovian, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shayla Gourlay, and Brendan LaRose. You want to hear me mispronounce your name? Check out rewards on the Patreon. Thanks for all your support.